Hi, and welcome to this edition of the Mize Breakroom. My name is Marc Swearengin, Director of Business Development here at Mize, and today I'm joined with Carol Baber, Stacy Randel, shareholders here at Mize, and Andy Otting, a Senior Auditor. So welcome. Thank you for taking some time today. Let's kind of get into the fun. Tell us about auditing services. What does it entail? What do you guys do?
Well, I actually just explained this to my 15-year-old niece earlier today.
Okay.
Companies hire us to come in and look at their books and records and make sure that their financial statements are accurate. We are not the IRS kind of auditor, so we're the good kind, not the bad kind.
Okay.
And that's pretty much in a nutshell what we do. So we go in and look at documentation around the amounts that are going to be in the financial statements,
Okay.
and then produce an audit report that summarizes.
I think there is some information out there that, okay, we're coming in and fixing your financials, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with them once we do the audit report and the financial statements, and that's not really accurate.
Okay.
We do have a materiality number that we look at and that kind of thing. So we also do some sampling in our audits. So we provide reasonable assurance on the financial statements.
Okay.
Right. And audit services fits underneath the umbrella of Attest services, which includes a full audit, a review, sometimes agreed upon procedures, which varies client to client, and even, I don't know if compilation would fall under Attest services too. But then, the goal is to then issue the report based on the procedures performed to state, that their financial records are free of material misstatement, essentially.
So it's a kind of a good segue. So how is the audit department kind of structured here? I know that some of you are in different offices. So how do we structure that here at Mize?
So I'm in Overland Park,
Mm-hmm.
and we have shareholders.
Mm-hmm.
We actually have shareholders, directors, managers, seniors, and then 2 levels of staff.
Okay.
I would say that the difference between a senior and a manager is not very apparent to me. We have quite a few jobs where a senior will actually run the job, but maybe a less difficult job than a manager would actually in charge. So
Okay. How big is the department? How many auditors do we have?
we have about 10, 11, depends on the day.
Okay.
And you have
8 or 9.
Oh,
yeah.
Seven or
That's a
8.
Yeah.
Pretty good size.
So total, and we're trying to think of our department as one department, even though we're physically in 2 office locations. So we're
we've
doing.
recently integrated staff meetings together and a lot more collaboration between the 2 offices. It used to be we would just have a Topeka staff meeting, and it was kind of limited contact between the 2, but now we're collaborating a lot more, putting people from both offices on different jobs, vice versa. And so we've been able to utilize the skill set and the people in both offices a lot more.
So a little more on the personal side, why did you take up a career in auditing? It doesn't seem like as you're a young person, you're like, man, I want to be an auditor. So how does that happen? How does someone get into auditing?
So my father is a CPA, and he is an audit partner at a different firm. And so I didn't know what I wanted to do. I didn't really have a set career path I wanted to follow, and I was playing sports in college, and he told me to, study accounting. If you want to be in the business world, it's the language, of business. And so I studied accounting, and then he just said through auditing, you'll get a wide exposure to a lot of different industries, and you'll get to see how these companies and organizations work. And it's just a good field to start in because you get your feet wet in a lot of different things. And then from there, you can either make a career out of it or you can branch into one of those industries. And so that was kind of the reason I chose that path.
That's good.
he came from a CPA background. My whole family were teachers. And I was actually in education through the beginning of my junior year. And I decided I want to make a little more money. Just a little.
Teaching didn't do it?
Yeah, teaching, didn't really do it. So I switched to accounting. And I knew nothing going into the business world, just because all of my family were teachers. So I decided that I didn't really want to do tax, didn't want to do, private companies. So I went into audit because I thought I could see various different industries that way. I did leave auditing and then I came back. So no 2 days are ever the same. That's what I love about my job. And I love all of the client contact.
That's great.
So
I knew going into college I wanted to do something in business, but had no exposure to accounting. Took an intro to accounting class, and it just made sense. And I was helping friends with homework and could see that it made sense to me and didn't to other people, and figured, well, that's probably what I should do. And then when I got hired to my first job at a firm in Springfield, Missouri, that was the position I was hired into, and so I have stayed in audit since then.
There you go. Great. Thank you, guys. Appreciate sharing that. Hopefully this isn't, because I don't understand the audit process that much. What is the role of the auditor in the process? Do they run the whole thing? Is it a solo act? So what is the role? I mean, of the
So
auditor.
every engagement usually has an engagement team, which is made up of the shareholder overseeing the job, a manager or a senior that's kind of the primary contact with the client, and then usually at least one, if not 2 to 3 staff on the job. And the role of the auditor would be, obviously we're having a lot of contact with the client, whether it's their CFO or controller, and they are providing documents we request, and we're viewing their financial records, doing substantive testing, things like that, to form kind of the basis, the evidence for the audit opinion. And kind of once we gather all of that, that's kind of what we use as the basis of that.
So kind of during that process, what kind of questions when you meet, you said a lot of client contact, what kind of questions you ask them? What are you, as people that maybe have never gone through that, things that they should be kind of prepared for?
On a high level, we're looking at financial statements and looking at things that look unusual. And whether that's a comparison to last year or a comparison to our expectation. If there was a reason for a change this year, they added 2 new programs, or went out into a different geographical location, then we would expect to see those changes. And if we don't see changes, that is a reason for a question. So that's kind of a really high level first foray into it.
the other side of that is just asking them about their processes and their internal controls. We have to get an understanding of the processes and the internal controls. We don't have to test, per se, all of the internal controls. Maybe a few of them in the higher risk areas, but and we have to get a documentation of that. There's a lot required by regulators for auditors. So, and we actually get a report card, per se, is it 4 years?
3 years.
3 years. We get
audited.
we get audited. Someone comes in and takes a look at a sample of all of our audits.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So the auditor's getting audited.
Yes.
That's great. Well, you brought up something I was going to ask you maybe a little later. What are internal controls? That's probably a big topic and things, but what are they? What are some examples and stuff?
Yeah, so just controls around the processes at the organization. Typically, they revolve around cash receipts, cash disbursements, payroll, things like that. The segregation of duties, making sure that the same person that's posting the information to the GL is not the one that is in control of issuing checks or receiving checks, things like that. And so a lot of times we ask them to provide us, usually in a memo format, of how does this work, the cash receipts process, and then we go and talk to the individuals of the organization and kind of make sure that that all aligns with what they're telling us, that these controls are really in place.
Okay.
A kind of common term, it would be checks and balances over what happens at an organization, how money comes in, how money goes out. And something that was new for us as auditors this year is having to look at controls over IT. We're not doing an IT audit. We're not IT professionals, but we have to understand the process because IT is such a big part of the financial reporting and the way that an organization records things is all electronic now. So we have to understand who has access to the system and both the physical controls over that and the IT controls over passwords and how is somebody added and taken out of the system, things like that. So we've kind of gotten a crash course on IT controls this year because we've had to do testing around that.
I've gotten a lot of questions over the years from board members, presidents, that kind of thing. You're here to find if there's a fraud going on in my organization, and that is not what we're looking for. If we find it, we will bring it to their attention. But I just did a little bit of research and for a board meeting that I went to last week, and I found there was a study done in 2020. Only 4% of frauds are identified by a financial statement audit.
Wow.
So
Wow. There's a decent misconception of what.
very
really
much
means.
so.
Very much
Okay.
so.
You'd mentioned it's something when you were talking about the controls about a memo form. So do these controls have to be well documented? Can it just be verbal? Like how does that help or hinder through the audit process?
We would hope that the processes are documented and communicated, to the employees. A lot of time, it just depends on the organization. Some smaller, clients that we have that may be, family-owned company or it's just a small office space and everybody's close and familiar and they all understand how things work. But then we just, in that situation, we would discuss with each of them, and maybe if they don't have it formally documented, we would kind of document what they're saying and say, hey, does this look right? And confirm that with various individuals. But usually with a bigger client or a bigger organization, that stuff is
Usually documented.
documented.
Yeah. I guess the question is really like, when do people need an audit? Like, when do clients come to us for auditing? Is it something they have to do? Is it something they choose to do? What starts that?
It depends on the organization. A lot of nonprofits will have a bylaws requirement for an audit. If a company has an outside lender or like a construction company has a bonding company, there is often a requirement for some level of service, either a review or an audit. And sometimes it's because ownership just wants one. So one of our first conversations that we have when we get a request for a proposal or an inquiry is, do you really need an audit? Or is there another type of service that would be better or more suited for your type of organization? So we'll present some other options unless they are absolutely certain they need an audit, and sometimes that's the case. We want to make sure that they understand what they're asking for, because audit's kind of the common term, but there are other services that we can provide that might be better, especially like if it's a small nonprofit organization and they're really budget conscious. There's other things that we can do that have a lower cost to them than an audit if those other services will meet what they're looking for.
And I think you maybe mentioned in the past, as a firm, we can't do audit if we're doing other things for them. We can't provide accounting services, so there has to be kind of that separation. Is that right? Kind of individual
Independence.
independence. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
On a technical side, just doing some research, what is limited versus reasonable assurance? What does that mean in the auditing practice?
So that would be the type of report that we issue.
Okay.
An audit report would be, we're providing reasonable assurance. A review report would be limited assurance. And then a compilation, Andy mentioned earlier, is basically we're getting the information from the client, making sure that it doesn't look out of place to us and producing financial statements, but we're not issuing any kind of assurance on it. And then there's another type of procedure, again, that Andy referred to, that's called an agreed upon procedures. So maybe a client just wants us to look at their inventory system and balances, so we can go in and do an inventory count and do procedures around inventory, but not do a full-blown audit or a full-blown review. And again, that if that's the only thing that they're concerned about, and we can provide a service to them at a cost that's more reasonable for what they're looking for, that is a limited assurance kind of procedure as well.
As you go up the levels of service, the amount of assurance actually increases, but so does the price.
Okay.
And I'll have somebody call me to get a quote on an audit, and I'll say, do you really need an audit, or could you manage with a review engagement or a compilation engagement? And we talk through that a little bit, but I don't like to do audits just to do audits. I think they're expensive. I mean, all of our services are expensive, but audits are definitely the most.
What's a timeline on an audit take? I imagine it's probably depends on the levels that we're at, but what is kind of a typical engagement? How long does that last?
Depends on the client,
Yeah.
depends on, how quickly they get things to us that we ask for, and how far out we've scheduled it. If somebody calls us and says, I need an audit done in 2 weeks, that's not happening. But if someone is a recurring client, and we have there's a lot of work we have to do in the first year, that once that's done, we don't have to do that level of work going forward. We have to update our memos. We have to update our understanding, but we don't have to create those from scratch. We don't have to gather all the documentation that we're required to have on, like bylaws, and if it's a nonprofit, on their tax exempt status and those kinds of things. Once we have those in the file, then we have them and we can move forward. We also don't have to learn who to talk to and who to ask for what documents and what kinds of things to ask for. So that first year is always longer, but an audit can be anywhere from 2 weeks to 2 months, depending on the size of the client and the scope of
Or
the
longer.
Or
procedures, or
longer.
longer.
I can imagine, especially if they're very slow to get you information and all that happen. During that process, how much time do you spend like on client sites?
Just depends. Some a couple days, some maybe a whole week. It just depends how much. In recent years, through technology advances and stuff, and we've been able to get a lot more documents virtually. Where even when I started 5-6 years ago, we had to go out, and a lot of stuff was still on paper, and you'd scan and do it that way. But now we've got a document submission portal called Inflow that's been very helpful for clients to scan files and submit, spreadsheets, things like that directly to us, and that limits the amount of time that we have to be on site. But still always like to go out and touch base and make contact face to face for meetings and things like that. So it just depends client to client.
And just being on site, working on the audits, that's what the clients see. We're doing probably 3 times that
At least.
Away from it.
in the office,
Yeah.
and
Both ahead of time
And
and
at
what
the
we
end.
refer to as planning.
Right.
right.
Which is just continues to grow what we have to do as part of that process. And then usually we'll write the audit report after we're out of the client's office, and then there's a review process. So every work paper or everything we prepare as auditors gets at least one level of review. So
Internally?
yes, yeah. So say Andy prepares a work paper as part of the audit file, and if I'm the partner on the job, I'm going to review that. Or if there's a manager in between, that manager will review it, and I may or may not, depending on what it entails. So a lot of that is done. Almost all of that's done off-site.
I will say the time on site is super valuable just because you may go over a variety of things, via email and ask questions, but then when you just get out and sit down and talk, even if it's informal over lunch or something, things will come up that you may not have touched base on, or that just may not have came up over the course of, your required inquiries and preparing the work papers.
I think Stacy, we talked about once, you'd mentioned even body language, right? Kind of help you indicate what maybe other questions you should ask.
Yeah.
Again, you're doing a great job of prompting my questions, but how has auditing changed over the years? You mentioned like some of the technology, but how have you guys seen that change?
Yeah, technology, they keep coming out with new standards, so that every few years throws a wrench into things. I mean, kind of as soon as you get comfortable, there's a new topic to become familiar with, and maybe a new way of presenting it on the financial statements, things like that.
Paper to electronic.
Yeah, paper
Yeah.
electronic was huge.
Oh, yeah.
Huge. I never would have thought to do an inventory observation, for example, where we go out and do test counts of inventory virtually. And that came along as a part of COVID.
Yeah, I was wondering about that. We had a discussion earlier how COVID might have changed things.
Right.
Yeah.
Because you couldn't do anything during that, right? I mean, you couldn't go, audits were being done, but you couldn't really go.
Depend on the client.
Yeah, it just
and
depended.
what facilities were like, if they had a place where a large conference room where we could go and be socially distanced from each other and from client, and we could still go out there, but most of our clients were working remotely. So most of our work was remote. And then it's been a hybrid of that, if you will, post-COVID, where we've done more work virtually or outside of their office. But like Andy said, we still value that FaceTime. We like to get out and see our clients.
That's great. So if someone comes into that needs, they need it, they want it. You mentioned there's different. If they want, what steps do they take to kick off an audit process? Do they contact their own CPA? Do they? What is that? What would that look like?
It varies
Yeah.
depending on if they have to go through a proposal process, or have to want to, whatever, or if they have someone that they already work with on tax work or something else, and they just go directly to that firm. But so that's kind of the very first initial contact.
Some companies want full-blown proposals. Other companies will call and say, found you on the internet. Can you just give me the cost?
Get down to it. Yeah.
Let's get down to
Uh-huh.
it. Yeah. So it just varies.
Okay.
Can I ask a question?
You can.
What's the percentage or difference between people that are referred to us versus just, or like that we get referred to, I should say, versus people that just call up with no prior, knowledge of our firm?
I'd say at least in my experience, it's unusual for someone to at least not know who the firm is.
Sure.
Most of our clients here out of the Topeka office are fairly local, so they've heard of us or know somebody that has worked with us, or they've been on a board of a different organization that had some interaction with us. So, but we do also get, especially on required audits, like on the governmental side, or they've gotten a grant, so now they have to have an audit. Then they're just Googling, and those are kind of the cold calls that we get.
Yeah.
Great. Well, I appreciate you guys spending some time with me today. It's been great. If anybody has any questions or would like to learn more, visit us at micpas.com. You can find some information. You can also send an email to breakroom@micpas.com, and I'll make sure that these fine folks get your questions answered for you. So I appreciate you guys spending some time with me today.
Sure.
Thank you.
Thank
Thanks.
you.